This is Mom Maintenance, episode 23. Just because you feel it doesn't mean it's real. I'm Anna Stice. This is the podcast for moms who want to understand what's happening in their brains so they can feel a little less overwhelmed and become more intentional about how they show up in their lives. Today, I want to talk about a cognitive distortion called emotional reasoning. Now remember, cognitive distortions are patterns of thinking that our brains have developed over a lifetime. They're patterns that aren't necessarily serving us. A lot of the time they create more problems in our minds and keep us stuck instead of allowing us to move forward. So, emotional reasoning is when we assume that because we feel something, it must be true. Here are a few examples of this. I feel guilty, so that means I must have done something wrong. I feel embarrassed in a situation, so I must have done something stupid to cause it. I feel worried, so there must be something wrong in my world right now. I feel rejected, so that must mean this person or this group of people doesn't like me. I feel like a bad mom, so maybe that means I am one. We take a feeling, which is real, and turn it into evidence about the facts of a situation. But the problem is that emotions are not evidence of fact. Remember, emotions are chemicals released in our bodies. They create physical sensations and vibrations in our bodies because of the thoughts happening in our minds. Emotions give us information about how our bodies are responding to the thoughts we're having. Emotions can help us understand what is happening inside of us. They can show us what we're thinking, what we're afraid of, or what feels important to us. Sometimes these emotions can be very intense, and the more intense they are, the more true they seem. But emotions cannot tell us with certainty what is happening inside someone else. Just because we feel something during an interaction or in response to something another person says or does, that doesn't mean we actually know what is going on in that person's head. Our emotions don't tell us what other people think about us, and they certainly can't give us a final verdict about who we are. This gets confusing because feelings can be so strong. As you feel something more intensely, it seems like that feeling must be coming directly from what happened. Something happens and we feel guilty, so we think the guilt proves that we did something wrong. But there is a thought between what happened and how we feel. It may be a quick flash. It may happen so fast that we don't even articulate it in words in our mind. But there is always a thought or interpretation between what happened and the emotion we experience. Something happens, we have some kind of external experience, then we interpret it and we have a thought about it. That interpretation creates the feeling in our bodies. And then we use the feeling as proof that our interpretation was correct. It's like putting the cart before the horse. We forget that a thought created the feeling. Instead, we think the feeling proves that our thought is true. And it becomes a loop. Okay, so let me give you a real life example of this. Let's say you set a boundary with your teenager. And as most teenagers do, they don't like it. They push back. That's natural. They're angry and they say, "You're mean. You don't trust me. You just want to ruin my life." Even though part of you knows this boundary is important, hearing those words feels awful. The thoughts start coming and you begin to feel guilty and second guess yourself. You feel anxious. You think, maybe I am being too controlling, which creates an emotion. You think, maybe I'm making too big a deal out of this, which creates another emotion. You think, maybe a good mom wouldn't have upset her child this much. Then your brain points to all that guilt and self-doubt and says, see, you feel terrible. You must be doing something wrong. But feeling like a bad mom is not proof that you are one. You may feel guilty because you're thinking, if I were handling this correctly, my child wouldn't be so upset with me. Okay, stop. Is that actually true? Our kids' brains are still developing. They don't always have the perspective to understand why a boundary might be healthy or necessary. Sometimes all they understand in that moment is that they don't like it. So they argue and push back. They say whatever they think might make us change our minds. That doesn't make them bad kids. It makes them human beings who are learning how to tolerate disappointment, regulate their emotions, and take responsibility for their choices. And that's one of the reasons they have parents. we have more perspective, and we have the responsibility to make decisions that we believe are best for them, even when they don't agree with us. But if we interpret the uncomfortable emotions we feel when they push back as proof that our boundary is wrong, we may change our parenting accordingly. Not because we thoughtfully decided that the boundary wasn't appropriate, but because we're trying to make our own discomfort, guilt, or anxiety go away. We over-explain, we back down, we try to convince our child to agree with us. Sometimes we resist the discomfort by becoming angry ourselves. Or we change the boundary so they'll stop being angry and we can stop feeling guilty. All of this can be a response to the thought, maybe I'm a bad mom because I feel so bad right now. But the end result is that we may not actually be doing what is best for our child. Our children are allowed to be disappointed with our decisions. They're allowed to misunderstand us. They're even allowed to be angry with us. But their anger is not proof that our boundary is wrong. This doesn't mean that we never examine our behavior. Sometimes we do react out of anger. Sometimes we're too harsh. Sometimes we misunderstand our child or say something we wish we hadn't said. We can be honest about that. We can apologize and repair things when we need to. But I feel guilty and I did something wrong are two different statements. I feel guilty is an emotion I feel in my body. I showed up in a way that doesn't align with my values is a conclusion that requires us to look at the facts, our behavior, and our values, not just the intensity of our emotions. We take too much stock in the emotion without realizing that our own thinking helped create it. Then we use the emotion to confirm the original thought. We create our own confirmation bias. I think emotional reasoning can be especially tricky for those of us who consider ourselves very empathetic. We notice other people's moods. We hear a slight change in someone's voice. We see the expression on their faces. We can feel when the energy in a room shifts. But sometimes we move from noticing something to believing we know exactly what it means. And then we decide what it means about us and our relationship with them or who we are. For example, my husband is quiet, so he must be upset with me. My friend responded differently than I expected, so I must have offended her. My child is disappointed, so something must have gone wrong and I must have let them down. We take something we think another person may be feeling, we don't even know for sure, and then we add our own emotional response to it. Then we treat the entire story as fact. But being empathetic does not mean that we can read minds. We might be right that someone is upset, but we still don't necessarily know why they're upset. We don't know what they're thinking, and we certainly don't know that their emotion has anything to do with us. Maybe your husband has had a stressful day at work, and he responds to you a little more abruptly than usual. It hurts your feelings. You feel a little rejected and disconnected, and then your brain immediately says, he's mad at me. Something is wrong between us. Maybe he doesn't even like being around me. Because you feel hurt, that interpretation seems true. And it can feel easier to lean into that interpretation than to remain curious or live with the fact that you don't actually know what he's thinking. Your hurt feelings don't tell you what your husband is thinking. They tell you what you are thinking about his behavior. Or maybe you say something to a friend and she doesn't respond the way you expected. Suddenly you feel embarrassed or a little put off. And you think, why did I say that? That sounded so stupid. She probably thinks I'm ridiculous. Because you feel embarrassed, you assume that you embarrassed yourself. But maybe your friend misunderstood you. Maybe she was distracted. Maybe what you said touched something tender inside of her. Maybe the expression you noticed had absolutely nothing to do with you. Maybe it did. Or maybe you simply don't know. That can be uncomfortable because our brains would often rather create an unpleasant explanation than live with uncertainty. At least if we decide, she thinks I'm stupid, we feel like we understand what happened, even though we don't actually know that it's true. We can't use another person's reaction combined with our emotional response to their reaction as the final verdict on what happened or who we are. But we do it all the time. The same thing happens with worry. Maybe you get an email from your child's teacher saying that your child is behind in school. Immediately you start to worry. And because the worry feels so intense, your brain begins to believe that the situation must be really serious. If I'm this worried, something must be terribly wrong. What if my child never catches up? What if school is always hard for them? What if I haven't done enough? But worry, the emotion of worry, is not a prediction of the future. It doesn't tell us what is going to happen next. It tells us what our brain currently believes this information might mean. It can feel useful to go down that path and consider every possible outcome, because maybe if you worry about all of it now, you can protect your child from it. But the fact may simply be that your child is behind in one area of school right now today. The rest is a story that your brain is creating about the future. That doesn't mean you ignore the email or decide that it doesn't matter. You can ask questions, you can talk with a teacher, you can find out what support your child needs. But you can do all of that without treating your worry as proof that your child's future is in terrible danger. This is the distinction I think is so important to understand. Our emotions matter, but they are not always reliable evidence of what is happening outside of us. Your emotions can show you what is happening inside of you. They can alert you to the thoughts you're having. They can help you notice something you may want to examine. But you still get to decide what meaning you give those emotions. You get to decide whether you want to receive someone else's reaction as useful information, whether there's something you genuinely want to repair, or whether you're taking responsibility for something that doesn't belong to you. We don't have to take every emotion we experience and internalize it as a truth about ourselves. The goal isn't to stop feeling guilt, embarrassment, worry, or hurt, or any of the other negative emotions. We're always going to feel emotions because we're human beings. We're not robots. And the point certainly isn't to walk around saying, I don't care how anyone feels, while we behave however we want. It's okay to feel the emotion. You can sit with the guilt, the embarrassment, the worry, or the discomfort without immediately deciding that it means something about you, and without doing something just to make the feeling go away. You don't have to change the boundary so your child will stop being angry. You don't have to send a long text explaining what you meant. You don't have to fix everyone's mood so you can feel better. Sometimes you can simply notice, I feel really uncomfortable right now. You can let the emotion be there. You can feel it in your body. You can give it a little space without turning it into a conclusion about who you are or what you've done. So your mom maintenance this week is to pause the next time you notice yourself using a feeling as evidence. Maybe you hear yourself thinking, I feel guilty, so I must have done something wrong. I feel embarrassed, so I must have looked stupid. I feel worried, so something bad must be happening. I feel like a bad mom, so maybe I am one. When you notice yourself doing this, pause and ask, what actually happened? What am I making it mean? What am I thinking that is creating this feeling? Do I know what the other person is thinking, or am I assuming? Is there something here that I genuinely want to repair? Or am I about to do something simply because I want this uncomfortable feeling to go away? Then give yourself permission not to react immediately. You can feel guilty and still hold a healthy boundary. You can feel embarrassed without deciding that you embarrassed yourself. You can feel worried without treating your fear as a prediction. You can feel someone else's disappointment without making it mean that you failed them. Your feelings deserve your attention. They can give you valuable information about the stories happening inside your own mind, but they don't deserve authority over your decisions. Your emotions are real, they matter, but they are not always proof. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next week.